This last session is on Chapter 6, Projects and Management Actions, and Chapter 7, Plan Implementation. So I'll give a broad overview on what projects are included in the plan. We looked at a total of 12, as shown here in the table. The rank on the left-hand side was based off of a matrix, which that matrix table you can find in the GSP. I will not be going over that today, but the top two projects are the Fresno City wastewater treatment plant recharge. There's basins that will be utilized both off the Houghton Canal system and the Lower Dry Creek system. So that would be getting water from FID and recharging it within basins in the City of Fresno wastewater treatment plant. So we show several costs here. The first cost is the capital cost of the project. The second is the annual capital payment. There's also the average annual yield, and the final cost on the right-hand side is the cost per acre foot. So that's based off of the annual payment and the average annual acre foot. So as you can see, it ranges from $41 for the top two projects and anywhere from over $100. So the third-rate project, Southwest Groundwater Banking, which is located within MAGSA, has an annual cost of $154 per acre foot. But there's a range of values in here. The top three would have minimal construction. The Southwest Groundwater Banking is already constructed, so that would either be getting an agreement with FID or potentially building a new basin adjacent to the groundwater banking facility. And then the top two, the basins are already constructed. The cost would be for a pipeline from the canal to the basins. So those aren't as expensive as the Stinson North Canal project. There's phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is $61 million and phase 2 is $110 million. And the reason they're so expensive, and you'll see on the next couple slides, is we have to do all of the environmental documentation, go through all the permitting processes, still have to design the project, and it includes many miles of canals. So the construction costs for those projects are high.
If I can interrupt you, Linda, this is not our menu of projects. These are not the only ones we're considering. These were projects that have been considered at a variety of times in the MAGSA area, and so they had various stages of planning and analysis done on them prior, which allowed us to do this particular ranking. There are many other projects that we'll be considering and possibly constructing over the period of time of 20 years. These were just a representative sample to show you kind of some of the things we're thinking about. The main thing, I think the theme of this is that it will not be for free that we get this problem solved, that it will cost some money and it will take some investment, and it's going to be up to the landowners to be together and kind of acting as one in terms of the contributions and those investments to make sure that we do our job in reducing that 91,100 acre feet down to zero at the earliest possible date.
So the next couple of slides are of the various projects and their locations. So this is a map of the northern part of the McMullen area. So starting very north, you can see there's a project that comes off of the San Joaquin River and travels southeast throughout the district, or the GSA. That is the Stinson North Canal Phase 2. So as you can see from the bright green line, there's a long way that the canal has to travel. So it'll go from the San Joaquin River and ultimately connect down into the McMullen project. There's also along the northeast side the South Sandridge Canal and the Houghton Wasteway expansion project. So the Houghton Wasteway there's already an existing basin there for tail end of the FID system. That project would be to expand that basin so you could recharge more water. Along the western edge, there is the James Bypass surface water supply and recharge. So that would be taking water from James and bringing it into the MAGSA GSA and either And for all these projects, it can be done by an actual dedicated recharge basin or on-farm recharge. That wasn't determined within the GSP, but either option, as long as we're getting recharge, would be beneficial. And the last project on this slide is along the southern portion, the Lawson Avenue reverse flow and recharge. So that would be getting water from off the Kings or from James and bringing it into the basin or to the MAGSA GSA. So this shows the southern portion. The Fresno City wastewater treatment plant, those basins are not located within the MAGSA GSA area, but they are up gradient of the MAGSA GSA. So even though we are recharging water outside of the MAGSA boundary, the groundwater would ultimately flow into MAGSA. So it would still benefit the area. There's also along the left-hand side of the map, the Southwest Banking Project. That would be getting water from FID, and those basins shown are already constructed. We also have the McMullen On-Farm Recharge Project. Phase 1 has been constructed or is almost done with construction. This would be expanding upon Phase 1 and adding Phase 2 and 3. There's also along the southern portion of MAGSA, the Stinson North Canal and Recharge Project. So this one would be getting water off of the Kings River and bringing it into the GSA. So if both Stinson Phase 1 and Phase 2 were constructed, we would be able to get floodwater off of either the San Joaquin River or the Kings River, whichever is available, or both. But we'd have a canal that goes through the length of MAGSA. So it would have more flexibility in getting water and transporting it throughout the GSA. And then we have the consolidated Riston Ditch intertie. So it'd be getting water from Consolidated Irrigation District and bringing it into the McMullen area and either do recharge basin or on-farm recharge. And the final project is the Grantland recharge. Are there any questions on projects before we move on?
And again, just to reiterate, these are projects that are fairly large in scale, larger than perhaps some of the individual landowners might be able to comprehend or see the benefit of. That's not to say that individual projects on individual landowners' lands wouldn't be another suitable project. And I'm often asked, can I build a small pond on my property to help? And the answer is yes. In fact, I always say that if you're looking at 100 acres of almonds as a block and you're deciding to replace them, would it be better to replace them with 100 acres of almonds or perhaps 80 acres of almonds with 20 acres of flexibility? And that would provide us with some additional smaller but just as effective recharge facilities. So in your future planning, as you do start to consider planting and replanting, please don't hesitate to call the office and we can maybe talk about some of the possibilities that would be an opportunity of that moment that might not otherwise be there if you plant trees and are looking at the next 20 to 100 years worth of orchards and the downside of having to take them out. So don't consider anything off the table. And if you have ideas, we welcome them at any time and be happy to talk about projects on your individual properties when you're ready.
If there's no questions, we'll move on to management actions. I'm not going to go over every single management action that is discussed within the plan. I will go over the broad topics, which include education and outreach. This would be potentially sending out flyers with information so growers could better understand how much water they're using and how much water their crop needs. So if they can improve irrigation efficiencies, if they're still doing flood, maybe switching to drip, to save water, that would help with the overdraft number. So those would be first step, and Matt will probably chime in at some point, but we have a couple knobs we're trying to turn. So the first is developing supplies, and some of that comes from education and outreach, and we want to do as much as we can before we start dealing with demand reduction. But we'll also have wellhead requirements. So for any new wells that are installed, having meters and sounding tubes installed at the wells. So that way we can gather information and better understand what's going on in the GSA. There's also some groundwater allocations per acre discussed in the plan, and groundwater marketing and trading. And for groundwater marketing and trading, we would need flow meters installed. So in order to market and trade the water, we need to know how much is being pumped and how much extra water there is available for marketing and trading. There's also some fees and incentives discussed, as well as groundwater pumping restrictions. So we want to do as much as we can to bring in supplies before we start reducing demand and imposing pumping restrictions.
I think I'll do my chiming now. The management actions are effectively our toolbox for the future. Gives the board a wide range of possible solutions as necessary as we progress through the 20-year period, so that they can go to those without having to kind of reinvent the wheel at any point in time. Going back to what Lynn said about education and outreach, just to put it in practical terms, if we were able to increase our efficiencies, our irrigation efficiencies in MAGSA by 5%, if you remember, there was about a 300,000 acre foot total groundwater production of demand required to meet our needs. 5% of that would be 15,000 acre feet. And so right there, you're talking about a substantial, reduction in our overdraft, and we haven't had to do any type of restriction at that point. It's simply using our water in a more efficient manner. Again, reminding you that metering will be necessary for groundwater allocations and or marketing. It's a precondition almost to being able to implement either one of those management actions. Neither one of which is considered to be a negative action, but in order to make them positive and make them effective, we will have to know precisely how much water is coming out of the ground.
So the final chapter in the GSP is plan implementation. So this is how we're going to reach sustainability, how are we going to implement projects and management actions and monitoring to achieve that goal in 2040. So our first priority is to develop supplies, start those conversations with neighbors, and get some water for those projects that we have identified, and also fill data gaps. The first 5 years, as Matt had said earlier, we're data hungry. We want to know what exactly is going on within the GSA, get a better handle on the water level, water quality, and gather as much information as possible. One data gap that we do have is we don't have a good handle on how many wells are drilled below the Corcoran clay, how much pumping is going on below the Corcoran clay, because one thing we don't want to have happen is everyone stop pumping from the unconfined and start pumping in the confined while there's water available. That would lead to land subsidence if there's too much pumping from underneath the unconfined, because under the Corcoran clay is where land subsidence occurs. So we want to gather more information, gather well construction information, and understand where wells are drilled below the Corcoran clay and how many there are. So that's just one data gap, but in the plan, all the data gaps are identified. So we're going to be trying to get as much information to fill in those data gaps. And then the second priority is the pumping restriction. So that's more of our last resort. We want to do as much as we can up front with education and developing supplies before we start any pumping restrictions.
Once again, the crazy data guy has to chime in here. And again, I want to reiterate the fact that we will be trying to gather more data than is necessary to satisfy the state, because really what we have to give to the state is a fairly minimum amount of information on an annual and 5-year basis. But in order to manage properly our GSA, we're going to need more data than what they require, almost on a monthly basis to get it. But at the same time, we're going to want to give maximum credit and understanding, acknowledgement towards the proprietary nature of individual landowners pumping stuff. And so we'll be interested in getting that data and trying to protect that and keep that local, keep that within our own kitchen and not have it go out to the rest of the world to the extent possible.
So this table showed you earlier when we were talking about water budget. We want to mitigate 10% of the overdraft in the first 5 years, 20 in the second 5, 30%, and then ultimately 40% in the last 5 years. So the cumulative mitigation by 2040 mitigate 91,100 acre feet. And one thing to point out is that number will most likely change as we gather more data. When working with the coordinated effort to what the overdraft for the basin was, we had to define a base period. So the base period was, I think, a year earlier. And so originally MAGSA had a mitigation number of about 120,000. So by shifting that 1 year to a more normal average hydrologic period, it brought it down to 91,100. So as our base period moves, or as our timeline moves going forward, that number may go up and it may go down depending on what the water years have been like. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, is these are draft numbers and they're subject to change as we move forward with the plan and as we gather more data.
It's a question. Matt,
Yes.
addressed specifically to you.
Yes.
Is the GSA willing to provide incentives to growers to install well logging equipment to provide extra data to the GSA?
I'd say the answer to that is yes. We have not specifically focused on that yet, but we're actually in the process right now of developing some potential incentive programs that are more monetary in nature. The obvious incentives towards having well metering equipment installed is that you will in fact be able to participate to the maximum extent in a water marketing program, and of course that will have long-term economic effects as well as practical ones. So there are some kind of naturally occurring incentives by being able to play in the market, and there will be some initial economic incentives to try to encourage you to do that sooner rather than later. The reality is, though, that by about 5 to 7 years out is our estimate right now, we're going to try to have to get everybody that's operating a well onto a metered system. So we will enhance our ability to manage between years 1 and 7, but from 7 to 20, we're going to have meters on every well.
So this is just an example of what we might do to mitigate the overdraft. This can change as we get more projects, get more water, but this is just to give you an idea that in the beginning we're going to be focused primarily on projects, some management actions like education and outreach, but the main emphasis is going to be on the projects. And then as we get closer to 2040, we might have to implement more management actions to reach sustainability. But this is just to give you a visual on, see how much we have to address in the first 5 years and the second 5 years, and then ultimately 91,100 acre feet by 2040. So this is subject to change as we continue to implement the plan once it's been submitted in 2020. And the supply side is the goal of starting out, and then what's not able to be met with supply, we'll have to implement management actions to make up the difference. So we have our next poll, which is how much you'd be willing to spend on projects in the area.
Bear with us while we get the poll set up. Okay, we're live.
So how much per year would you be willing to invest in projects that bring surface water to the area, like canals and recharge facilities? So this would be spending money on the projects we identified, or others.
We need a tiebreaker. We had a comment in the chat, hard to answer unless you know reliability, and quantity of water.
Well, I guess I would comment to that only by saying that what our targets are here in our plan is to reduce that 91,100 100% by actions which don't require reductions in the use of water. But to the extent that we're unable to finance our solutions, then we probably are looking at reductions. So I'm not sure that they're directly related, but it's our intention for every dollar that's used here to get the maximum benefit of avoiding water reductions. And I really don't expect human nature to lend you towards going to the high end of this, but we're not going to know who is voting, so we just like to do a little litmus test on what we're possibly looking at here on our limitations for planning. Looks like we have a pretty wide range, but obviously we know that we're going to, and our purpose will be to stay on the lighter side of this range, but we do appreciate the fact that there are those out there who are willing to consider fairly substantial investments. This is serious stuff. And MAGSA, giving credit to the other GSAs in the basin, MAGSA is slightly behind, or if not entirely behind, on infrastructure because it's been a groundwater only area for its entire existence, and some of these other folks to the east of us have spent a lot of money on their infrastructure. So we're going to have to do a little catch up in order to be able to come up to their speed and get maximum benefit. So it will be more expensive early, but hopefully over the long run, not anymore so. Thank you for your honesty.
So moving forward, if you haven't already, you can download the GSP from the McMullen area website. And there's also forms you can fill out online, or you can email McMullen or talk to Matt at the MAGS office to provide comments. And we encourage you to read the plan and give us feedback. There's also going to be another workshop and office hour in September, and then the public hearing is set for October 16th. So here's the upcoming events. The office hour chat is Wednesday, September 18th. So you don't have to come into the office. We'll be online as well. Another opportunity as you read through the plan, if you get more questions, to ask any questions you have on the plan. Board meetings are the first Wednesday of the month at 2 p.m. at the Kerman Community Center, and then the public hearing is October 16th at 2:10 p.m.
More specifically, September 4th is our next scheduled board meeting, and certainly welcome anybody to come out and ask questions at that point. There will not be an October board meeting on the first Wednesday of the month. It is scheduled for October 16th. That allows for the completion of the 90-day review period and the kind of the processing by the Technical Advisory Committee and the staff of comments that we receive, with the target of getting to October 16th and actually being able to submit to the board a plan that they are able to adopt at that point. And again, just kind of a reminder that we will adopt our plan and we will wait. We are right now, looks like we are on schedule to be the first to potentially adopt within the subbasin, but we will wait for the other 6 GSAs to complete their process and adopt their GSA plans, their GSPs. And then once we kind of put a bow on that with our coordination agreement, then our entire package of Kings Basin plans and coordination agreement will be submitted to the state, at which point we will kind of go live as a groundwater sustainability agency, and we'll begin to plan in earnest for the future as we begin to do this in real time rather than in planning time. Question?
Yeah, so we have a question. What should growers be doing now during the next 1 to 5 years to not only help out, but be prepared for any restrictions that may come later?
I would say stay intimately involved, continue to visit our website for updates, come to the meetings, put your input in. But to the extent possible, we'll be communicating with you and you with us. Obviously, I've made a point about data, and one of the most important initial ingredients to this plan is to get as much data as possible as soon as possible. I'm going through about 1,000 well construction reports right now that are affected by the MAGSA boundaries. And so I'm going to try to do what I can to identify those that are potentially still in use and those who are not. And then I'll be writing letters and communicating directly by telephone and or social media or whatever with our growers to try to gain their acceptance and approval to allow us to come on and assist them in measuring their groundwater outputs. Education and outreach will be heavily involved in trying to train our growers to do a better job with their efficiencies, and we'll probably have some tools available to growers like your bank accounts might be for your own cash accounts. We will probably have some groundwater estimates and groundwater accounts that you can use as part of your future planning. And then, of course, planting. I mean, if you're looking at retiring an almond orchard that's reached its post 20-year reasonable life, and you're planning on doing a replant of that acreage, we would love to talk to you about that. We're not going to try to twist your arm, but we'd like to give you the practicalities associated with 100% planting versus perhaps a lesser planting of your acreage as we plan for the future and maintaining that flexibility. So yes, stay in contact, and we're going to have lots and lots of new updates as we go forward, and hopefully we're all working together. We're going to get where we need to get.
So this is the end of the presentation. Matt's information is shown on the screen, so the rest of the time is for answering questions if you have any. So feel free to type your question in the comment box and we'll answer them.
And my favorite saying is there's no such thing as a dumb question, so don't feel like anything you ask is inappropriate, because this is all new to everybody in this room, in this basin, in this state. And so there's no answers definite yet. We're working towards those. And your comments are really important to us. So make sure you take an opportunity to comment on the comment areas of the website. There is the comment, GSP comment on the GSP download. And then, of course, we do have the comments at mcmullenarea.org, which feel free to drop emails there any time of the day, and we want to hear them. Technical Advisory Committee is definitely literally standing by to receive as many comments as we get and to analyze that and really try to make our plan the very best it can be on October 16th.
And then I just wanted to let you all know we have a survey evaluation of this webinar. So if you participated, if you could just give a few more minutes to fill out the survey, that would help us moving forward, as we want to continue to use this as a tool and, of course, improve upon it if we can. So I'm going to put the link to that survey right here in the chat. Make it easy. It really should only take a minute or so. And I'll be emailing the survey out as well. We had a comment that says, finally information that provides direct info on where MAGSA is going and the potential costs.
I think you're welcome. It's like being in one of those game rooms where you have to solve the solution in order to get out of there before your character dies. And so we have the same situation. We have until 2040 to find all the clues that are made available to us and answer the clues correctly to get us out of that box before we get squished. And hopefully we will get there sooner than 2040. That would be the target.
It says, so no extra costs anticipated besides the already passed Prop 218 assessment?
Oh, that would be an incorrect statement. There will be additional costs. Our initial $19 per acre assessment was intended to pay for the costs of the planning process. We will probably see a reduction in the planning aspect of the charges and a shifting to the more practical implementation side. And those numbers will not be known until we have a full analysis. The engineers will give us a full analysis, and we will come back to you again and talk to you about additional charges well in advance of another Prop 218 election. But for now, that's where we are. Probably won't be back to visit you for those kind of charges or that kind of an assessment until mid-2020.
Yeah, the second question is, what is the current advantage of providing wellhead information now?
The current information, wellhead information, we like to establish a database as early as possible, get all that data entry done as early as possible, get the fixed data in early, and then that way we'll take the variable data over the temporal period as we go. And the more data we get early, the more we can start to cross-check against the historical data we've had to use, and the earlier we'll be able to make determinations relative to adaptive management versus estimated management. Well, I'd like to say once again, thank you for attending the webinar. I know a few of you are going to begin to check out, and you can do that if you're satisfied and you don't have any additional questions. Again, this was just an attempt on our part to try to meet you partway on education and outreach. I want to thank our outreach folks who put this whole webinar together, the same ones who did the workshop earlier in the week. They do an excellent job, and we're very, very fortunate to have them here. And to Lynn Groundwater, this was a big lift for her, but she's our expert on the whole idea of groundwater management. We really appreciate her participating today and giving us that great update on the GSP.